Hi, I'm Amin. I'm a professor of history at the University of Michigan Dearborn. I teach Middle Eastern history. I've begun doing some work on Iranian American history in Michigan. And I want to share my reactions to this chapter on racialized ethnicity from Kendi's book. This passage in particular um, sort of grabbed my attention. I think it does a good job of laying out how he's seeing the intersection of ethnicity and race. And I think one aspect that it doesn't come through in this description, which I think nonetheless you would probably acknowledge, is how uh, accent and use of language can be other things that sort of distinguish ethnic groups, certainly, but then with a racialized sort of ethnic hierarchy, then language becomes and culture becomes part of the overall sense of creating a hierarchy. And I'll give some examples of that from Iranian American experiences that I've recorded in oral history. This exchange that he recalls, the "Where are you from" exchange, I certainly have experienced that myself and have gone through something like this interaction that you see here. Where are you from has more to do with what kind of person are you and where do you fit. And certainly Iranian Americans have had to place themselves into the racial hierarchy of America as they've moved here. And I have a couple of examples that will give a sense of what that is. But there's been research that's been published on this for a while now, and probably the most current, up-to-date, and really very compelling book is by Neda Maghbouleh, The Limits of Whiteness, where she talks about how Iranian Americans navigate the question of being white, black, or brown. Another interesting fact is that they've done some surveys of Iranian Americans, and those that identify politically as Democrats are, as I recall, half as likely to identify themselves as being white as Iranian Americans who identify as Republican. So racial hierarchy, political affiliation, ethnicity, these things tend to entwine quite interestingly. I'm going to share an oral history excerpt from a woman named Mahinshad Ovais. She was a teacher and a principal in Iran before she immigrated here, and she talks about her experience of coming here and learning the English and trying to get herself established in the States, even though she had family here, and that's one of the reasons she was sponsored to immigrate here. But she was definitely aware of and taken aback by race in America. And I'll just let her speak for herself, and you can sort of see what I'm talking about.
مسئله که خیلی من اینجا بهش برخوردم، به نظر من خیلی از آمریکایی ها هنوز هم نجات پرستن. من میبینم به چشم دیگه به سیاه پوستا نگاه میکنن، به خارجی ها به چشم دیگه نگاه میکنن و طبقه بندی میکنن. این صورت به نژادان نگاه میکنن. رفتم توی OCC اسم بنویسم، فرمو که به من داد نوشتش که black, white, that I shocked. پرسیدم یعنی چی سفید و سیاه؟ من که نه سفیدم من نه سیاهم، من قهوه‌ای هم مثلا قهوه‌ای بنویسم کدومش؟ من هیچ کدوم نیستم. گفت از کدوم کشوری؟ گفتم ایرانی هستم. گفت سفید هستی؟ گفتم من سفید نیستم اصلا. گفت تو بنویس سفید، تو سفیدی. این راجب رنگی نیست، این راجب نژاده. دقیق گفت نژاده و خیلی بد بود.
I want to also point out that racial hierarchies based on complexion, based on ethnicity, those are all realities back in Iran as well. And Iran is a multi-ethnic, multi-confessional country and has its own history of racism and racialized ethnic hierarchy. And for some Iranian immigrants, they're navigating this issue of race and ethnic racism as they experience it back home, and also then how they experience it here. They might be from an ethnic minority in Iran, but then they are sort of lumped together as Iranian, even though they would see a distinction as a Persian-speaking versus an Azeri-speaking versus a Kurdish-speaking Iranian, for example, experience. And there's been research on both the kind of racial dimensions of Iranian nationalism for the modern Iranian nation state. And there's a book by Reza Zia Ebrahimi that I would definitely recommend that you look at. And if you go to the Ajam Media Collective, there's a series of articles on Afro-Iranians and also the way race works in Iran itself. And so that baggage from the quote-unquote old country follows into the American context. The last example I'll share with you is a Iranian-American from the province of Azerbaijan. So he's Azeri Turkish, as my own family is Azeri in background. And they speak a different language than the majority Persian speaker. And Dr. Shahpur Ansari talks about how he experienced ethnic bias in Iran. And in the rest of his interview, which I don't share here, but just to give you a sense, those experiences back in Iran color his experiences back when it comes to the States. It's not that he didn't experience bias here, but he found it less severe than the bias he experienced as a Turkish-speaking Iranian, Azeri Iranian back home. And that's one of the things that made America a more comfortable place for him to be, ultimately.
June 2nd, 1936.
And did you grow up initially speaking Turkish or Persian or both? Or?
Only Turkish. Nobody in my neighborhood, in my town, could fluently speak Persian.
Oh.
Just put some in Facebook, I put the picture of the 4 dictators. Reza Shah, then Stalin, and then Muhammad Reza Shah, then Khomeini. I said my life has been 82 years spent under influence of those 4 dictators. That's ashamed, and that's really amazing, I have to say. The only dictator who gave us a freedom of speech about our language, our culture, our music is Stalin.
So I think what's striking here is that while recognizing that all 4 of these political leaders who rule Iran or parts of Iran, the 2 Pahlavi kings, Stalin when there's a Soviet invasion of Iran in the 1940s, an occupation of Iran, and then Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Republic, that all 4 of those authoritarian leaders, the least authoritarian, the most liberal, from his perspective on the issue of just the freedom to speak the language you want to speak, his Azeri Turkish, Stalin winds up being, if I can put it this way, the good guy. And so the ability, the power of racialized ethnicity or ethnic racism to create a sense of marginalization is powerful throughout the world. It's powerful in the Iranian context, and of course it's powerful here at home. And I think Kendi's book alerts us to be aware to all these sort of dimensions, and that's one of the things I very much appreciate about this chapter. Anyway, that's all I got.